Lesson 31, I will interpret division word problems as either number of groups unknown or group size unknown. So we're going to talk a little bit about whenever we are solving word problems that are division. We're going to talk about whether the number that we're solving for tells us the number of groups or if it tells us this group size. So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so in your math journals, I want you to go ahead and get it ready by putting today's date, and I also want you to write interpret unknown as size of group or number of groups, and that's going to make more sense to you as we get into this lesson a little bit more. All right, so the first thing I want you to do is I want you just to follow along. You do not need to copy this in your journal, but I do want you to follow along with me. As we start, we're going to use that RDWW process, and we're going to start with read. Dr. Casey has 1,868 milliliters of medicine T. She poured equal amounts of medicine into 4 containers. How many containers of medicine are in, how many milliliters of medicine are in each container? So let's think to ourselves, can we draw something? Okay, so if there's something that you can draw, I want you to go ahead and draw it in your journal. And then I want you to press play when you're finished. The first thing I would draw is I would draw a tape diagram that looks something like this, okay? So I've got my tape diagram and I'm looking back at what I know. I know that this is how much medicine she has. So that is my total. That is how much she has altogether. So I'm going to label at the top 1,868 milliliters because that is our total. Then it tells us that she has poured this into 4 equal containers. So I'm going to take my tape diagram and I'm going to divide it into 4 groups. Okay, so this is what I'm going to draw. So what are we trying to find out? The question says how much was in each group, or how much was in, I'm going to look and see what the exact wording was. It says how much was in each container. So each of these represents a container. So we're asking ourselves, these little boxes here, is this the number of groups, or is this the group size? Well, do we know the number of groups that we have? We do. We know there's 4 groups. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 containers. So we're not trying to find out the number of groups. We're trying to find out the group size. We want to know how much is in each group. So for this particular one, we want to know the size of the group. So how would we find out what the size of the group is? We would use division because these are equal. And when you want to put something into equal groups, you can divide. So now we're going to take 1,868 and we're going to divide it. What are we going to divide it by? We're going to divide it by 4. So in your math journal, I want you to go ahead and I want you to write 1,868 divided by 4, and I want you to try to solve that all by yourself. And I want you to press play after you think you have the answer. Okay, if you did it correctly, you would have come up with 467, no remainder. So you can look through this problem to see what I did if you did not get the same answer as me and see where you made your mistake. All right, so this is our first W. This is right. We wrote a number sentence and we solved it. Now we have to do our second W. Each container will have 467 milliliters of medicine. This is our second W. So make sure that you copy this in your math journal too. So this is the whole entire part here that you should have in your math journal. This is the draw. This is the first right. This is the second right. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our problem set today, and we're going to go ahead and get busy on it. So we're going to use the RDWW process on these two. You'll notice that at first it says draw a tape diagram and solve. The first 2 tape diagrams have been drawn for you. Identify if the group size or the number of groups is unknown. So let's take a look at our problem. Monique needs exactly 4 plates on each table for the banquet. If she has 312 plates, how many tables is she able to prepare? So when you take a look at this tape diagram, it looks a little different than any tape diagram we've seen before so far. You're going to notice that 312 is our total. And then you're going to notice that they have this one section here with a 4 in it, and they have dot, 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 question mark, dot, dot, dot. So when you think to yourself, why do you think they have a question mark here? They're not trying to figure out what this bar is. Normally, that's what that means. Normally, we have something divided into two parts, and we know this part, we don't know this part. Well, that's not what we're trying to figure out because she has 312 plates, and she's putting 4 plates on each table. The reason why there's a question mark here is because we don't know how many squares to make because that's what we're trying to find out. We know the group size. Each group has 4. We don't know the number of groups. So this is what your tape diagram looks like when you're trying to figure out the number of groups. So to find out how many groups, we would take 312 and we would divide it by 4. I want you to try to do that by yourself and then press play when you're finished and see if we get the same answer. All right, so I cannot divide 3 by 4 because it's too small. So if you'll remember from the last lesson, I said that we can go ahead and think of this as 31 divided by 4. Well, nothing divided by 4 is exactly 31. And I know 8 times 4 is 32, so that's too much. So I'm going to go back to 7. 7 times 4 is 28, and 31 minus 28 is 3. So now I've got 3 tens. I add that to my 2 ones. 32 divided by 4 is exactly 8, and 8 times 4 is 32, and that gives me a remainder of 0. So if I were going to draw boxes, which I'm not, I would draw 78 of them. So this is my draw. This is my number sentence. Now I'm going to answer this sentence. How many tables is she able to prepare? So I would say she is able to prepare 78 tables. So again, in this problem, we knew the group size. We didn't know the number of groups. So it says identify if the group size or the number of groups is unknown. So in this case, I'm going to write number of groups because that's what we were trying to find out. All right, let's look at problem number 2. 2,365 books were donated to an elementary school. If 5 classrooms shared the books equally, how many books did each class receive? All right, so I've got my total here again is 2,365 books. And I know that I'm putting them into 5 groups. I want to know how much is in each group. So my unknown this time is group size. Okay, I know the number of groups. I don't know how much is in each group. So now I'm going to use division. 2,365 divided by 5, because that's how many classrooms there are, to find out how many books are going to go to each class. So I want you to divide, and then when you're finished dividing, come back. If you're stuck and you don't know what to do, you can always follow along with me. All right, so again, I cannot take 2 and divide it by 5. I've got to think of this as 23. Well, nothing times 5 is exactly 23, but 4 times 5 is 20. So 23 minus 20 is 3. And I'm going to add to that 6 tens, and I'm going to divide that by 5. 36 divided by 5 is 7. 7 times 5 is 35. That's going to leave me with 1 10. I add that to my 5 ones. 15 divided by 5 is 3. And 3 times 5 is 15, so I have a remainder of 0. So I have 473 in each group. So now I have to answer the questions. How many books did each class receive? So I'm going to say each class received. I hope that you write neater than I do. It's hard for me to write with this pen. Each class received 473 books. Okay, let's take a look at number 3. If 1,503 kilograms of rice was packed in sacks weighing 3 kilograms each, how many sacks were packed? Okay, so this time we have to draw our own tape diagram. So here is my rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and cheat a little bit so that my rectangle looks nice and neat. Okay, so there is my rectangle. I know my total. My total is 1,503. And it says it was packed in sacks weighing 3 kilograms each. How many sacks were packed? So I know that there is 3 kilograms in each sack, but I don't know how many sacks. So I would have to draw my tape diagram like this, and this means I don't know how many groups. So my unknown this time is number of groups. I know the group size. There's 3 in each group, but I don't know how many groups. So when I divide this time, it's going to tell me how many sacks I could make if they were 3 kilograms each. So I want you to divide by 3, and I want you to come back. If you're still having trouble with long division, you can stick with me, but I hope that you will try to do a little bit of it on your own. So I cannot take 1,000 divided by 3, so I'm going to do 15 divided by 3, which is 5, and notice I'm putting that in the hundreds place. 5 times 3 is 15. 15 minus 15 is 0, and here's one of those 0 in the dividend problems. 0 divided by 3 would be 0. You can't just skip that. So 0 minus 0 is 0. And now I have 3 ones. 3 ones divided by 3 is 1. And 1 times 3 is 3. So that means that I could have 501 sacks. So how many sacks were packed? 501 sacks were packed. That rhymes. So we found out the number of groups. There was 501 groups. All right, let's take a look at number 4. Rita made 5 batches of cookies. There were a total of 2,400 cookies. If there were the same number of cookies in each batch, how many cookies were in 4 batches? So let's take a minute here to draw our tape diagram. All right, we know the total. The total is 2,400 cookies. So that's our total. And now we've got to figure out, are we trying to figure out the number of groups or the group size? Well, it says here that there were 4 batches. So that's our number of groups. There were 4 groups of cookies, and we want to know how many cookies was in each group. So this is where my question mark will go. I want to know how much would be in each group. So this time it is group size, not number of groups that I'm trying to solve for. So I'm going to take 2,400, this is going to be an easy division problem, divide it by 4. So remember, I can say 24 divided by 4 is 6. This is 24 hundreds divided by 4, so this equals 6 hundreds. How many cookies were in 4 batches? So there were 600 cookies in each batch, or I could have said in 4 batches, either one. Okay, that was an easy division problem. I like those. All right, every day Sarah drives the same distance to work and back home. If Sarah drove 1,008 miles in 5 days, how far did she drive in 3 days? All right, so let's take a look here and think about this. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my tape diagram. Oops, I lost my cursor. All right, so here's my tape diagram. And I know my total is 1,008 miles. So I've got to kind of think about this for a minute. She drove 1,008 miles in 5 days. How far did she drive in 3 days? So I guess this is going to be a 2-step problem. I think I need to find out how much Sarah drove in 1 day before I can figure out how much she drove in 5 days. So let's go ahead and take our tape diagram. We're going to divide this into 5 groups like this. And this tells me the number of groups, but I want to know how much is in each group. So I want to know the group size. And that's going to be step 1 of our problem here. So if I take 1,008 and I divide it by 5, this should tell me how much Sarah drove in 1 day. So let's go ahead and solve this. You can solve this by yourself and then come back. All right, 10 divided by 5 is 2. 2 times 5 is 10, so that leaves me with 0. 0 tens, so that means there's 0 tens in the quotient. 0 minus 0 is 0, and then I have 8. And then I have 8 divided by 5 is 1, and 1 minus 5 is 3. Something's not working out here. Okay, I did a little bit of investigating. I paused the video and did a little bit of investigating. It turns out that this is a mistake. This should say 1,005, and this should say 1,005. So on your problem set, you can change that 1,008 to 1,005 if that's what yours says, which I'm sure it does because I copied yours from this. So, because I got to thinking, this can't have a remainder, something's not right. So this should be 1,005. So let's go ahead and change all of this. I'm sorry about that. Let's make this a 5. And then I bet that probably confused you a little bit too whenever you were trying to solve this on your own. You probably just put a remainder and didn't think much about it. But I got to thinking, well, hold on a minute. I'm not going to be able to do the second step of this problem. All right, so if I have 201 and 5 minus 5 is 0, so now I have no remainder. Okay, so what that means is Sarah drove 201 miles in 1 day. But the question says, how far did she drive in 3 days? So if I've got 201, 201 in 3 days. So I could add all three of these together, or I could multiply 201 times 3. It's an easy multiplication problem. And my answer would be Sarah drove 603 miles in 3 days. Okay? All right, now, whenever you get ready to do your exit slip, I want you to remember that if you are having any trouble trying to figure out whether this is group size or size of groups, all you have to do is come back to your problem set and look for a problem that's like the one on your exit slip. That is not cheating. That is how you learn. And remember, anytime that something is difficult, that just means that you are learning. And as soon as you learn how to do it, it'll be easy to you and you will just be practicing.